During the following program, look for the Maine PBS web markers, which indicate there is in-depth information about Maine authors and their books on our website.
Well, the one thing that amused me probably more than anything else was when someone came up to me really and said, "Jesus Christ, Mim, how could you use all that goddamn bad language in your book?"
Production of A Good Read on Maine PBS is made possible in part by the Davis Family Foundation.
Evelyn, she made a lovely foghorn when she got excited. "Where are you off to? Here's all these orders sitting here right in my way."
Hi, I'm Sandy Phippen, your host for A Good Read. In the early 1900s, Miriam Colwell grew up in Prospect Harbor, one of the many small fishing villages in Hancock County. After leaving the University of Maine, she went off to New York City to see what the city could do for an aspiring young author. Before long, however, she was back living in Maine, working in the post office, and writing the first of her 3 novels, one of which was just republished in 1998.
Young is the story of 24 hours in the lives of 2 close friends who have just graduated from high school. I took my coffee in the other room and found one old crumpled cigarette in a pack Dad had left for dead on the windowsill. The Christmas cactus needed water, and there was a dust mouse curled around the piano leg, but I certainly didn't feel like noticing.
So Miriam, what is it like being resurrected as a writer after 40-some years?
Well, it's very pleasant indeed, and gratifying, and I can't think what could be nicer.
You've been all over the state with this reissue of Young.
That all over the state might be a little broad.
A little bit much. Well, up and down the coast anyway.
Okay.
And to Bangor. You've been to Bangor.
Right.
It's on now on television.
Yeah, it's been lovely.
And it's wonderful that kids now in Maine high schools are rediscovering it.
Well, it's very gratifying. That was a wonderful thing about having it republished, which I never would have imagined that people read it now and don't seem to feel too much the fact that it was written and published 40 years ago.
That's right. Your characters are wonderful. I mean, you've got Evelyn and Susan, the 2 girls. Are they both versions of you, I assume?
Well, I suppose in the abstract way that everything anyone writes is, I mean, you can go on that assumption, but no, I would not say that they were. The aspects.
Aspects, right?
Definitely aspects.
You've called yourself shy, and Susan is the shy, quiet, literary one. She writes poetry.
Certainly Susan was much closer to my personality than Evelyn.
Right. And
I had a lot more fun writing about Evelyn, of course.
Oh, sure. Evelyn's marvelous.
Right.
Because she's so outspoken and brassy, but fun and a good person.
To tell the truth, I was really weighed down that morning with those 4 years at Easton High behind me and the future looming ahead. What next? That was the big question. With Charlie, it was different. He was entering the Maritime Academy in the fall to become an officer and a gentleman. Bigger miracles have happened. And after 4 years, he would be commanding an engine room or something, making a fortune every month, as well as wearing a uniform. He thought that was all there was to it, being pretty naive, even if his mother did subscribe to the New Yorker.
How did it do? It did fairly well,
didn't it? Yeah.
It went through several editions.
Yeah, it did. And then it was sold to the movies, too,
Mm-hmm.
but a movie was never made.
Never made.
I think it would have made a good movie.
I do too.
In fact, I wrote a play version of it that I still think is a pretty good play.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I'd like to see that. I really would. I hope you'll show me that.
I will. I'd be delighted.
I know that you have several editions were in England too. There was a hardcover that came out in England and then paperback versions. But the way they advertised it was kind of sleazy. Did you?
They, of course, always pick up on anything that could be
Yes.
sensational.
Right, that's right. Yes, the sex issue particularly. Evelyn was, though, an outspoken, free
Yes,
spirit.
she was a free spirit,
Mhm.
right.
And very funny, with a great sense of humor, too.
Right.
It was ahead of its time, wasn't it, don't you think?
Maybe.
Among those themes, you brought up all the important themes, and this is before the pill, before that
Right.
happened, before women's
Right.
liberation.
Right.
And Evelyn wanted to have more than life than just
Evelyn was liberated.
Yes, she certainly
She
was.
was.
What did people think of that around here? Did anybody comment on it?
I don't really remember too much about the reaction to Young. I remember the reaction to my first novel,
Right.
Wind Off the Water, which was extreme.
Yes.
But I think by the time Young came along, I was
Used to it.
I was hardened.
Mm-hmm.
My scar tissue had formed. Howard kicked at the muddy ditch in front of the house and then suddenly shot off down the hill. He felt the need for violent action, violent speed, violent breaths. He wanted to play something hard and fast and breathless, but he wasn't sure just yet that he wanted to find the other boys. He stumbled exhausted to the store steps and slumped down. Words began to bounce around in his head, and he beat time with one muddy foot. Goddamn slut, 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 goddamn slut, slut, slut. I had broken the ice, I guess.
Yes, you sure did. Your face was on the front page of all the papers and magazines. And
Yeah,
tell about
dreadful.
some of that, Miriam.
Well, the one thing that amused me probably more than anything else was when someone came up to me really and said, "Jesus Christ, Mim, how could you use all that goddamn bad language in your book?"
That does say it all right there. But everybody read it. Everybody in town read it, obviously.
I'm sure they did. Right.
All over town. And how did they react to you when they came in the post office?
Well, that was one reaction that I just quoted.
I remember everyone was reading it and talking about that awful book in Prospect Harbor. And the copy that I have that I've shown you, says in it, "dirty story." It's not a dirty story. It's a true story and a very true depiction of life here, I think, very much so. Did it change? Did the reaction change after a while, after things settled down?
I think so. I think so. At least I wasn't aware that it lasted.
Mm-hmm. How about fellow authors? Did other writers and artists, support you?
Yes, I think so. I had a lot of correspondence from people who write, from writers and from non-writers. I was amazed that I got letters from, people in Iowa who said, "I knew all the people in that."
That's right, of course. And also, they begin to see the literary quality, I hope, because it's well written. You're a good writer. That changed things, I think, after that. It was the subject matter that bothered everybody.
Of course, and as everything relaxed, as the years went on, it
Right.
became less and less shocking.
Did you always want to be a writer? I want to go back to the growing up now.
No, I don't think I had any strong feeling one way or the other. I always wondered what in the world I would be.
But you loved reading.
But I always loved reading and loved books and started writing
Early on.
verse or poetry in my teens. And
Were there writers that influenced you growing up? Ones you really admired?
I really have no idea who influenced me beyond Chenoweth. She certainly,
Right.
of course, was writing all this time and sending out and having short stories published, and so I just naturally began to write.
Could I say right off that when you met Chenoweth Hall, that changed your life totally? When you met Chenny?
Well, Chenny certainly was a very strong influence. Certainly, in fact, I just always felt that probably Chenny educated me. That I got my education. I mean, you know, the world of music and art was completely unknown to me.
Oh, it really
until
was
I met Chenny.
when you were growing
I
up?
mean, I wasn't really aware. I wasn't really interested. It hadn't been part of my experience.
That's right. Growing up in a small town in Maine like this.
So she just introduced me to things that I had never been aware of. And she certainly was a terrific influence on my life. Yeah.
Before you met Chenoweth, though, I want to go back to the early days. I mean, you grew up here and went to Winter Harbor High School and the University of Maine
Yeah.
in Orono. Were you an English major?
Yeah.
An English major at Maine,
Right.
okay.
But I left the university to go to New York.
Okay, so that would have been in late 1930s?
That would have, yeah, in 38 probably.
Okay, before World War II.
Right.
And so you were in New York City, but you didn't meet Chenoweth in New York City, I don't think.
No, I met Chenoweth in Korea, Maine.
Okay.
Katie's Restaurant,
Oh, yes.
which was a gathering place for
The art colony.
the art colony of this area.
Now that included Marsden Hartley at one time.
Later.
Chenoweth, though, came here with other New York women, young women.
She came here with friends from New York, and they were vacationed in Korea for several years before I met them, finally at Katie's Restaurant.
Right.
And then I went down the next year to visit Chenny in New York, drove my little four-cylindered Willys car,
You had an early compact car.
which was a forerunner of the compact cars, and I always called it the Bug. It was. It looked like a little brown bug. And I drove down to New York City, which was a great adventure, and had a lovely week in the city, and Chenny took me to the theater. And
So you fell in love with New York, too.
yeah, I did.
After you met Chenoweth in New York and you became friends, then she moved
Then the
you.
next year I went down.
Right, okay.
And shared an apartment with Chenny, and just did a number of things like writing freelance, advertising copy, and just loved New York.
But then you came home again. Was that when your grandfather was postmaster and he was no
My
longer-
grandfather was postmaster, and a new law was passed, mandatory retirement at 70. And I think at that time he was a few years over 70. And my grandparents were very anxious for me to be closer. And they were very hopeful that I would consider coming home and trying to get the job of postmaster. And I was very reluctant because I much preferred to stay in New York, but I did feel badly about being so far away from them. And Chenoweth, of course, had been living in New York, and she was dying to leave the city and be in Maine. She loved Maine. She loved Prospect Harbor and Korea, and she wanted to paint and write and
So this was
carve. And so she said, if you go back, I'll go back with you. And so we drove back in the Bug with all of our possessions from the apartment in the middle of the winter
this
of
was like
1940, I think.
1940, yes, just before
And
the war.
I became postmaster.
So you became postmistress at 23?
Yeah.
And were you called postmistress or postmaster?
Well, there are no postmistresses there.
So you were postmaster.
There's no sex
Okay, discrimination.
differentiation in the
Okay.
post office department. So I became postmaster.
All right.
And at the time, I think I was either the youngest or one of the youngest
In the country.
postmasters in the country. But of course, it was also one of the smallest offices in the country.
And was it good because it was small that you could do your writing then? You had time to do your writing maybe?
Yeah, well, it was good because my grandfather was still right there in the general store. He had been operating the post office all those years. So for the next 8 or 10 years,
He was
while
there.
he was right there, I just took off whenever I wanted to.
When Carolyn Shute burst onto the scene, and even before that, I think, Peyton Place, weren't you compared to that? And you have been compared and contrasted with that.
Probably.
And, well, let's go back to that. Let's go back to the first book. When Wind Off the Water came out, you were the postmaster
Right.
from prominent families. You come from Maine's first lobstering family. Your grandfather built the first lobster pound in the
My
United
grandfather Colwell apparently built the first lobster pound on the coast of Maine, and I'm not sure whether it was one of the first on the coast of New England.
And in the United States.
And he and my uncle, my father's brother Charles, were a big lobster company.
And did you have them in mind when you were recreating the lobster fishermen in Wind Off the Water?
No, not at all.
No, those were just composite characters from
Yeah,
people you knew
right.
growing up here.
But my second book was based very roughly on my grandfather Colwell's
Yes.
life.
And his relationship with that black man who used to live here.
Right. He had a neighbor who was also a lobster dealer and one of the respected citizens of the town who was black, which
Right.
I thought was a very interesting
It
thing.
is,
And
it
at
is.
that time, apparently, you know, he got along just fine. He was one of my grandfather's close friends.
Where did he come from, the black guy?
I believe he was, I think the story was that he was picked up on the wharf, maybe in England or somewhere,
Worked on the boats.
by a sea captain from this area and befriended and brought.
When he was young, really young.
When he was
A lot of black
very
cabin
young.
boys. There were black cabin boys on Maine
Right.
sea captain ships, that's for
Right.
sure. Now that book, really, that was unique because of that story of the friendship. I don't remember or recall or know about any novel about Maine at that period about a black guy. When you were growing up here, let's go back to that. How we should mention and why you grew up with your grandparents.
Well, my mother died when I was a year old, and so my maternal grandparents took me over and brought me up here in this house. So this was always my home.
And this house was
And
built
my father was a semi-invalid. He had tuberculosis, and he died when I was about 13 or 14.
Did he live near
And
here?
he lived with my Colwell grandparents.
Oh, right. Just right down the road
And
from here.
so I was always back and forth between the two houses, even though I lived here, but there was always a great deal of care and concern about my being with my father because of the danger of contagion, and he ate always by himself, and his dishes were always
Washed.
separate, and he always had a practical nurse who attended to his needs.
Did he work in the lobster industry too?
He was unable. He was in bed a good part of the time.
Okay. All right. But you were close also with some of your uncles and
Oh yes.
and people around town here. and
Oh
so on.
yes. I had a very close, supportive family.
Maybe we should talk now about all the authors you knew back here. You and Chenoweth together. You knew Ruth Moore and Eleanor Mayo.
Ruth and Eleanor. After my first book, Wind Off the Water, was published, I was in New York, and we always, even after we came up here, we were back and forth a great deal to New York, together or separately, whenever we could raise enough funds to pay the train fare.
Right, right.
Because Jenny had a lot of friends in New York that we could visit while we were there, but we didn't need money to get there.
Did you take the train from Ellsworth?
Bangor.
Bangor? You went to Bangor?
Wonderful day train, leaving Bangor at 7 in the morning, getting into Manhattan at 5 at night.
Oh, lovely.
I mean, a perfectly clean windows and
Comfortable.
smooth ride, and just a lovely, relaxing day.
The way to travel.
Give anything to be able to do it now.
That's right. A lot of us would. And then down the coast, Elizabeth Ogilvy and Dot Simpson. You knew them too.
I can't remember how I met them, but Ruth and Eleanor and Jenny and I all went down and spent a weekend on Gaze Island with Elizabeth and Dot.
Right. You have a picture to prove that.
I have some photographs, a little album of photographs to prove that.
Right. Now,
That was, I think, in 1950.
because I was growing up then as a boy, but I remember all these books coming out by all these women. And Chenoweth's book, too. Was that published before yours or the same time?
No.
Crow on the Spruce.
Wind Off the Water came out in 1945, and Crow on the Spruce, 1946.
46, a year afterwards.
And then my second one in 1947.
Right, that's right. Day of the Trumpet.
So we were quite busy.
And one of the things we left out was the colorful phrases that you have, and you preserve the old way of talking. You know, the down east. That's one thing that's
in
gone.
In the first
Yes.
two books, yeah.
Yes.
I'm not sure. You know, if I was rewriting that, I wouldn't.
You wouldn't do that.
I wouldn't do that.
Oh, really? Why?
I would try to get the same effect without the
dialect
right.
and the colorful way of talking.
Yeah, I think that is distracting.
But your similes are wonderful in Young. I mean,
Okay.
you made me laugh outright through rereading that.
I enjoyed writing that book. That really was fun.
It shows.
Yeah.
It really shows.
Right. I could hardly wait the end of the day to get Jenny to sit down so I could read her what I'd written.
Oh, I
It
meant
was
to.
with great amusement.
I
Never amused anyone more than it did me.
And so what happened? Of course, the big mystery is with both you and Chenoweth. Why did you both stop writing?
Well, I think Chenoweth stopped writing because she became much more interested in carving and painting.
So why did you stop writing?
I really don't know. I think laziness, one thing. I seem to have plenty of activity that I didn't lack for interests, and I didn't seem to feel the need to keep on working.
You remind me in that comment of Virginia Chase, Mary Ellen Chase's sister, who wrote also, and she told me once that, because I said, why didn't you write as many books as your sister? And she said, I wrote when I felt the need to, when I felt I had something to say.
Exactly. I think, you know, I just outgrew the feeling that, well, I think also you write to identify yourself.
Yes.
I mean,
That's right.
to find out who you are and so on. And I think I had found out pretty much, although it's a continuing process. But I just no longer had the motivation.
And you had a good life.
And I
You didn't
feel no lack of, I feel no need to go back to writing. I thought when I retired from the post office, I thought, now I will go back and at least, you know, I've got a couple of novels that were never published. And I keep thinking I should go back and see what I can do with those. And I thoroughly thought I would and never did.
You didn't want fame and fortune, Miriam?
As long as I have a reasonably sufficient income to live modestly on, I'm perfectly happy without fame and fortune. I wanted another cup of coffee, but my mother was all ready to sputter the minute she remembered what to sputter about. And what I needed more was a time of quiet meditation. Just then, the telephone rang, so I sneaked out the side door. Francis was sitting on the slope across the yard because his battery was weak. But my mother, who is usually good for a half hour on the phone, even if it's the business office, saying we haven't paid last month's bill, wasn't missing a trick.
Visit our website for more information about A Good Read and the writers featured in this series, including a transcript of the interviews, biographies of each of the authors, a complete list of their published works, some tips on how to find those books, what's on their own must-read book list, and more.
Production of A Good Read on Maine PBS is made possible in part by the Davis Family Foundation.
Well, I have a friend who found both family copies of both Wind Off the Water and Day of the Trumpet on the internet and sent them to me.
Oh, that's great.
And then I just had a friend who called up from Boston who had gone to a very nice used bookstore and found Wind Off the Water there. I was so excited.